Welcome to Ignite Your Life, where Brother Mercurio and I will be talking about the walk of Christ. In this last part of the series that we are doing with the walk of Christ, we are talking about the crucifixion. We are talking about the symbology of the cross that we bear. This is probably my favorite episode out of all the episodes that we've done because we really dive into overcoming those issues. What is your cross? How do you make that connection with the divine? Let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brother Mercurio and I are back again talking about the walk of Christ. Today we are going to be talking about the symbolism and the idea of the cross and how each of us sometimes in our life we face, kind of like a crossroad in our life, or we have that point in which we've got to make some decisions. So I really wanted to expand on this subject because this is an area that I think we all can identify with. I'm going to go ahead and bring the floor to you.
It's great to be back on the podcast again, and thank you, Michelle. What I think our theme for this time is all around this whole concept of the cross in Christianity. What does it mean? It has a symbolic meaning. It's not just nice, this is a symbol that represents Christianity because of the story of Jesus being crucified. There's a whole lot more to it. But the background obviously is that the core of Christian teachings comes from this idea that, after the life of Christ where he was performing miracles and healing, which we discussed in the previous podcast, he eventually gets to the point where a lot of this causes controversy, which I think happens when you want to change something. He was trying to change the mindset of a whole group of people in that time. And he got to the point where, even the Romans were getting nervous about this, and then they resorted to their famous punishment, which they did for people either who were political prisoners or people they didn't like, or obviously criminals, which was to nail someone to a cross and crucify them, because he was much more sophisticated, and he recognized that you actually have to change people's thinking at a much deeper level. There's no point. He probably could have done that, but what would it achieve particularly? It would just, there might be a victory, but it wouldn't have changed that fundamental turning point in human thinking that happened with Christianity. So he chose to use words and use teachings and use acts that would demonstrate how God's power operates in the world. And also he taught through actions, and I think the whole story of the crucifixion, for example, is him demonstrating what happens in human life anyway, in a much more severe form, which I guess it had to be because, you want people to remember this process. But it's sort of a bit like the stages of alchemy, the process he went through when he was carrying the cross and he dropped it, and it highlights different things we experience when we're trying to carry our cross or our burden. But I suppose what I wanted to talk about here is, what does that mean for us? What is this symbol of the cross that's become so significant, And yes, it's a symbol for Christianity, but also it's a very ancient symbol.
Let's talk about that, because the cross was very heavy to the point where he dropped it, 3 times? I want to kind of talk about just the significance of the heaviness. How they say the cross we bear, it's the burden that we carry, and falling. He fell 3 times. And there's a significance to that if you think about it. Like, what is the number 3? The Trinity. There's something to that. So it's like, how many times do you have to fall before you rise? He fell 3 times before they stood him up straight, right? And then when we're thinking about this, like the cross that we bear, what is our cross? What is our cross that we're bearing? What is that heavy burden that we're carrying? What do you think that actually is significant to? Because it is a death, but it's also a resurrection. But in general, do you think it's like the death of who we are consciously, like ridding all the pain, like he's carrying this burden and then he dies. You know how like he talks about that you have to be born again? He says, not of flesh, that kind of thing. So do you think that it's the death of the ego or the death? But I'm just kind of looking at this from as the symbology of this heaviness that we're carrying. We have to die, and we have to not physically die, but we have to have that death of ego, that we have to let go of that that burden that we're carrying. And maybe we have to do it like 3 times, it's like, get it right the first time, do it again, it's finally we get to a point after we dropped it and we fell down and we're so burdened by something. The only thing left is to rise.
Yeah. Firstly, I mean, you can interpret this, I guess, in many ways, but I think it is part of the human journey. And you could say that ultimately our own path in our life is our own. Nobody can do it for you. They might help you for a while along the way, a bit like Jesus was helped by Veronica wiping his forehead, or Simon of Cyrene picked up the cross and carried it for him for a little while. And people do that in our lives, don't they? So if we look at it as a metaphor of the life journey, and as we grow and develop through life, our ego does affect us. And life can feel very heavy sometimes. It can feel like, wow, I'm having to carry all of this stuff. I'm having to look after kids. I'm having to pay the bills. I'm having to, and then at other times it can seem lighter. It can seem more easy to carry, or we feel stronger or something. I think the cross is sort of a metaphor for life in that way, that, the way we have to carry things. And there's other metaphors in the Bible, like Jesus once told the guy who he healed at the waters. There was a guy there who'd been lame for many years and he couldn't get into the waters. We talked about it last week. But the words Jesus used when he healed him was, pick up your bed and walk, pick up your life. You're responsible for your life. You're the one that has to actually carry that burden, a bit like he had to carry the cross, and he knew it was him. He had to do it, even though it was really difficult and really hard. And there are moments in life like that, aren't there? I mean, so, what I like to talk about to my students sometimes is to say, well, we all come to the cross at some point. We all face this cross and we have to realize we're carrying it. We have to have come to a realization that we're responsible for all these things that we've built up for ourselves that we're carrying. Because we do it to ourselves ultimately. We make choices. We do things in life that actually lead us to the point where we feel burdened and we feel that we're carrying things, but we tend to forget we made that choice, or we'll blame the environment. And, at some point you have to face it. And the cross is a symbol for sacrifice, ultimately. It's a process that you go through, and probably there are things like 3 times because, usually we have to face things again and again a few times before we realize that we are responsible and we need to do it. That leads us to the point where we're actually accepting we need to be nailed onto this cross. We are nailed onto it. We can't get rid of it. We can't escape our burdens, not in an ordinary way, not in a way using our ego. We can't escape anything if we try to use our ego to escape it. So at some point the ego has to die in order for us to be reborn, as you say, and so on. So I think using all of that analogy, we have to face our own ego and we have to accept the fact that, we focus on ourselves too much. We are like, look at me, I am, I'm the answer, I'm this and I'm that. And once we realize that actually you're responsible for things, but it's not all about you necessarily, and all of these burdens are things that you created, your ego has caused to happen. And because it's a cross, there are sort of 4 arms to it. You could perhaps relate it to the 4 elements, the 4 different natural elements, which I know the mystics often do. They'll say that, in the material world, there are 4 elements. All of your burdens may be connected with each of those. Like you've got emotional burdens, which are like the water element. You've got, many earthly material burdens, which are the earth element. You've got thoughts and negative thinking and kind of cognitive patterns that you've inherited, which are perhaps the air element. And then you've got issues with your own energy, sexuality, passion, and all of these things, which are the fire element, probably. So you have to sacrifice all those things at some point. Otherwise, you'll not be free of this plane, this earth plane, or this earthly existence. So I think Jesus was demonstrating that process. He's just saying that for everyone, there comes a point where you have to face it. And you have to face it alone. Like in the story, you may know, he looked up and he said to God, Lama Sabachthani, why have you left me? Why have you quit me? So there's a real point of despair that everybody goes through. Everybody says, well, why do I have to do this on my own? Why? Why me? And then the answer comes afterwards, and you can be kind of freed from it. But you have to go through that process almost. If you don't go through the process, nothing's going to move. It's about That's an external thing. It's about you internally. And if you just kneel before the cross, it's sort of symbolic of you saying, well, actually, okay, now I'm willing to accept what God is teaching, and it's no longer my ego that's driving me. It's actually, I'm allowing, in the words of the theurgist, my higher self to direct my life, or my higher genius. So, but you can't do that until you get to the point of carrying the burden and realizing,
So this is about our own cross that we bear. Let's look at crossroads that we come into. Do you think that might also be a possible scenario, or, the choices that we make? Because it is a cross, right? And if you turn it sideways, there's two paths. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you've got it, potentially you can go this way or you can go this way.
It's a decision point, isn't it? A cross is a decision point, really.
And if you think about the situation that happened with Jesus, he could have denied it. He knew what was going to happen in advance anyway. He could have said, they're going to try to come after me. This person's going to betray me. I'm going to go to another city to avoid this. Follow me over here because this is what's happening. But he chose to face it. Yeah. Okay, so that was a crossroad for him.
You could say it that way too. That's very good.
Yeah. So he chose to face the situation because he knew that by doing this was going to be a very long symbol for people to be able to recognize within their life,
Oh yeah, and like many of his acts, he was teaching us. He was teaching us how to face a problem and how to deal with it, and what spirit you have to create in yourself in order to face a burden like that, something huge in your life,
And that's like the biggest burden you can ever have, is somebody accusing you of a false accusation. Like, I guess from what you were saying earlier, is because he called himself the King of the Jews, they were fearful that he was going to take over the government or claim that he's a king. So he's going to take over their space and their land. And so they were intimidated by this, and they were like,
Yeah. I mean, he didn't call himself that, but people around were. Based on the Old Testament, before he was around, there was a prediction that there would be a king-type person who would come and save everybody. So the Romans really kind of took that up and used it as another slur. Oh, you're just the king of the Jews, but you can't even save yourself from this cross. What are you doing? You think you're so powerful? But they missed the message completely in that. They missed the point that it's not about their power, and it's not about whether he can get himself on and off the cross. Because he could probably call down hundreds of angels and free himself if he wanted. But as you just said, he chose to face it himself and chose to go through that process publicly to show us how also to face issues and burdens. And it's true, isn't it? If you try and face it with your ego, you'll suffer immensely and probably won't gain anything from the process. But if you access your inner spirit, it doesn't matter what happens in the world. The world means nothing, essentially. Even if people are accusing you of things or framing you or setting you up, which happens so often.
A lot of people have those kind of dilemmas where they come into a situation where people are accusing them of something, or they don't like a behavior, or they're I think the thing that seems to be a theme for me that happens a lot is, and I still haven't figured out why, but it seems to be my cross, is that people take an idea of something and they turn it into something else. They put words in my mouth, or they put meaning to something that wasn't there. And it becomes frustrating sometimes because I'm like, how do you get me out to help you turn it into this? That's not even in my character. I'm compassionate. Somebody just assumes the very worst and it's like, don't you know me? I'm not capable of that behavior. Like, don't you know that I would never cause harm to somebody. I would never think in a certain way. I would never betray you. It's not in my nature to behave this way. And people do that. They start thinking, oh, because of this action. No, you're reading into something that's not there, Sometimes people kind of feel like there's certain actions that need to be taken They start putting meaning to things, or they think things should be done a certain way, but they don't think about what they did that started this scenario. Like, you asked me a question, I answered the question, you didn't like the answer, but yet then you go way over here and say something else, and I'm like, but you're getting upset that I gave you an answer to something, and now you're putting meaning behind it that wasn't there. It's like,
sounds like social media all over it.
Oh my God, tell me about it. Yeah, so it's like that seems to be like it happens to me a lot, and I feel like I'm constantly having to say, defend something that I didn't do, or I didn't feel,
right,
or I didn't say. This heaviness that I feel like that's always with me, in every relationship that I get into. The closer I get to someone, the closer I get, eventually somebody starts somehow or another putting their own personal fears upon me.
Isn't it interesting how people do that? I mean, Carl Jung used to talk about that. Psychology, that people project onto you what they have problems with.
Yeah, their fears, like their insecurities or their fears, or whatever it is. I think we all have these crosses, but how do you resolve something like that? Like, how do you resolve that within yourself? Because it's not ego. For me, it's a real situation that happens to me a lot. The only thing I can do is just clarify the situation and then try to forgive them for thinking that way. It's like, okay.
There are other ways to look at it. Like, once you recognize that it's actually their issue that they're projecting, in fact, you're not to blame at all. It's like somehow it's a tool you could use in a therapy session to say back to them, well, you've said this, however, it's not how I act. So it sounds to me like that's something in you that, you're struggling with, that you're finding it, that you have to please people, or you have to, present things in a way that perhaps takes the heat off yourself. In other words, they're not facing their cross by doing that.
Yeah, it's easy to say something like that to a client, but it's not so easy to say something like that to somebody that you care about, like that you love. It's sort of like, oh, that's on you, not me. That's a little harder to kind of to do that. It's because in the heat of the moment, especially, you're like, no, you're like almost like hurt. It's like this hurt, pain where you feel like, how could you think that way about me? Don't you know me? Right. I haven't ever given you any signal or sign that I would behave that way or think that way. This is never my intention.
That's the thing, you haven't. They've just pulled it out of themselves and projected it. It's not your fault. So it's difficult, that one. Yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah, and I do realize that this is a lesson for me, to recognize that this is their issue, but that still doesn't take away the pain. So it's still that cross. It's like it hurts it stings every single time. Yeah. And even though I can recognize now, instead of like going into a reactive state of, crying and like, no, and trying to prove myself, getting very, very upset. No, I don't react like that anymore. I just say, no, that's not in my behavior. I love you. I would never feel that way. I would never do that thing. This is not my intention. I thought, don't you know me? You should know this about me. And then I pretty much just say that and let it go. But then internally, I have to sit there and tell myself, this is their issue. This is their issue. But some people, you just can't say, oh, that's your issue, not mine. I mean, it sounds very kind of rude.
Maybe you'd say it in a different way. Maybe you'd try and teach them and draw it out of them, so they gain some understanding, rather than you wouldn't just say, oh yeah, it's your issue. But I mean, you could perhaps say, well, where does that come from that that you feel that way about me? It's has that happened to you before? You could get into some sort of discussion.
That's actually a really good way of saying it. I like that. That's really good. That's helpful, to
I've done
say it like that.
I mean, in my situation working in therapy with mentally ill people, often, things like that will happen quite a lot because people are troubled. People are having troubling thoughts, and they do come out with lots of different things. And a very wise doctor once said to me, well, always keep in mind that this is part of their pathology. This is part of their disease or their illness, the fact they do all these things. And that really helped me, actually, because it clicked my brain and it made me realize that it's not me. It's not about me. It's not my... Actually, it's just because they've got issues in their own self that they've never been able to resolve, or worse, they've become an illness, So, actually, there's no point me getting into an attachment thing with them, like blaming or getting angry or whatever, because it's not going to help either of us. It's probably actually going to cause more stress, and maybe they'll disengage. They won't be able to do therapy. So rather try and show understanding. And I suppose Jesus did that, quite a lot of the time. He was trying to get people to think rather than actually sort of correct them. It was more about trying to help them to gain understanding and thought about issues and situations. So, and which is the way to resolve the cross in some ways, isn't it? Like if you have understanding of something, it no longer becomes difficult, or it may reduce the pain from it or whatever it is. Whereas if you don't, we don't understand something, then it can be very difficult. It can become a huge burden and a huge cross to carry. Yeah, this is a really interesting point.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that we all have our crosses. We all come across things that seem to be a theme in our life. And I think that typically when there is something that's a theme, it is a lesson that we're here to learn about.
Right.
And, one of the things that I definitely overcame, getting very vulnerable here, but one of the things that I definitely overcame was fear of judgment. And that was a cross that I bared for a long time, that fear of being judged, especially talking about these kind of things. Like if I spoke about anything regarding religion or spirituality or mysticism or magic or anything like that, I was fearful that Christians would judge me or nail me on a cross. You know what I mean? And I had to overcome that and resolve that within myself to be able to actually do what I'm doing now. I mean, I do all different kinds of podcasts with all different kinds of people, like the one that we're going to be airing shortly about an exorcism. And I do one on a regular basis with Papa Doc, which he's a hoodoo priest. And it's like we get into some very controversial subjects sometimes. I mean, even the conversations that you and I are having, they can be very controversial because we're not just taking it literally. We're like looking into, the deeper meaning behind it, because most people see the cross as he died for my sins and now they're all forgiven. That's it. And
let's look at that. That's a very interesting thing that comes up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, so in fact, all the things we've just discussed, I think, are validated by saying he died for our sins, because in my view, his process of showing us how to face the cross, how to get on it, how to die on it, is dying for our sins. He's done it because he's helped us to make a major shift in our consciousness in how to deal with issues. So that saved us from continuing to sin, because it's breaking pattern,
I like what you just said. Okay, it saved us from continuing to sin. See, what you hear from most Christians is he saved us from our sins. So in other words, they believe that every sin has been forgiven, and so they can just keep on sinning.
Well, this is the misnomer, isn't it? This is the huge misnomer of concept, is that, that Jesus didn't give people license to go back and sin again.
Yeah.
It was like, well, yeah, okay, I've saved you from all your sins now. If you sin, that's not the issue. The issue is you. You've got to face the responsibility. You've got to transform yourself, and you've got to rise above it. It's not. It doesn't mean necessarily that, okay, now I've forgiven you, you can just go back and sin, do whatever you want, because you'll be forgiven anyway. It's not about that. It's about going into yourself, understanding why you're sinning. What it is about that, whatever you want to call sin. But what he has done is demonstrate to us how to face it and deal with it, which essentially is tapping into your inner self and your higher self, not depending on the world, not allowing your ego to be the thing that solves it, because it's not going to work. That's just not going to happen. you'll just make a bigger cross for yourself. So, in that way, I think this slightly kind of childlike understanding of he died for our sins that many churches present is missing that point a lot. It really doesn't mean that you have license to go out and sin.
Well, I mean, he actually said, and I think it's Matthew, and I'm maybe misquoting this, but I think it's Matthew 5 something, and he says, sin no more.
Right.
He goes, be like my Father in heaven, perfect, and go sin no more. And this has always been kind of like this big thing that I get a little riled up about. I'm serious. I do. Like if somebody posts something, on Facebook about this, I get like riled up about it. And I've gotten people like pretty upset because I'm like, I start quoting scriptures and saying, here's what it says, and you're being judgmental, and it says this about being judging, and then they come back and they're like, you're judging me for saying this, and and it just turns into a big mess, but it's like, it's hard for me, to like sit here and go, you're not evolving. And like this one lady said, she goes, I sin every day. And I'm like, well, that's a problem. And so let's just look at what the definition
Are you
of
proud
sin
of that or something?
I know you're proud of that. I mean, I'm sitting here going, well, geez, I have to sit here and think, and I'm not bragging here, okay? But I have to really think about when's the last time I sinned. And I really don't know that I can recall that. And that's how long it's been, since I've done something like that. It's been years and years and years and years. But let's define sin real quick, okay?
Well, this is it, isn't it? What is the definition of sin?
Yeah, so the dictionary actually says that sin is an immoral act considered to be a transgression against divine law. Okay, some people may be thinking that they're sinning because they may have gotten angry with somebody, or something like that. Like, might have had a bad thought, like, I'm really pissed off at this person, because they hurt me, and that kind of stuff. So is that really a sin, But then again, it does say monitor your thoughts in the Bible, like be in control of those things, because here's the reason. Every thought turns into words, and words turn into actions, and actions turns into your character. And so, like, if you allow those thoughts to continue, it ends up becoming who you are, and it manifests into your life.
Yeah.
Because as you think, you will become.
Yeah.
And that's in the Bible too. It's like Jesus says, it's all there. It's like, hey, this is it. So I think that when we're talking about immoral acts against the divine, that's basically what sin is. So, like, how can you sin and still be divine? That's a big question right there, right?
Yeah.
Because you're taking an immoral act against the divine. Like, how can you sit here and say Jesus is my personal savior, or that I'm walking with Christ, or that I sit here and try to profess your undying love? Jesus is connected to the Trinity. Okay, so you've got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and the Holy Ghost is the Divine Mother. So
traditional churches wouldn't accept the Divine Mother concept.
I agree.
Many other people would,
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
Just in case someone comes back to something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay, but let's just just Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Okay, so Jesus is part of that Trinity, and that Trinity becomes the one, right? Which is the Elohim. The Elohim is that Trinity. So if you are sinning, and you're sitting here saying, I have a relationship with Jesus, like Jesus is my God, you're still sinning against the Creator, the divine, the whole thing. I think that people try to separate it, and that was my point. It's like, oh, well, he came, and it's like they're kind of forgetting about the fact that it's, it's the whole,
I'm just going to define sin. It's humans. it's at the moment. They can that definition. The Catholic Church says there's venial sins and mortal sins. There's different types of sin that will either cause death or they'll cause you problems, and you have to go to confession to free yourself from those. And also, they've used it in the past to make people feel so guilty that they'll donate money and things to get rid of their sin. So I think we have to take out the human factor in that, because humans see things in the way they want to ultimately, don't they? It's like we judge people by our own standards very often. It's not really that objective until you get to a point perhaps where you realize, or you have your awakening, or your awareness of the divine that's in your life, which frees you up in a sense, because it then starts to inspire you and help you guide your life rather than the external world, or the definition of sin, or whatever is out there. You start to tap into your inner self, and therefore you probably just won't sin anyway. Even if you consciously you're not aware of it, you're probably just not going to sin because you're so in touch with that higher part of your nature. You don't need to, it just doesn't happen. So I think there's a deeper layer as well in that, isn't it? Which is why you can both sin and be divine, because people are a work in progress. We all make mistakes. We're not quite at the point of Jesus yet. So, we may well sin, but I think the problems are more likely to come where you deliberately go out and do an act against another person that may well be considered a sin.
I think that it just like it kind of boils down to how you define sin.
Right.
Are you intentionally, deliberately trying to destroy somebody, like destroy their business, or destroy them in destroy their marriage, or you have an affair and you hurt your spouse by doing that, you kill somebody, or you steal from somebody. I mean, these are some major things here that are pretty high on the totem pole. But then you've got other types of sins, I guess, that I'm not really even sure that I would define as a sin, but some people would. Those are the things where you didn't even realize you did it.
Yeah.
If it really comes down to it, that, when I think about it, I can't think of anything that I've done, seriously, I would never purposely hurt somebody. I wouldn't kill somebody. I wouldn't have an affair. I wouldn't destroy a marriage. I wouldn't destroy somebody's business. I wouldn't, go out and do harm on any level. And I wouldn't do harm against God, or God's laws. So, but
why wouldn't you do that?
Why wouldn't I? You're asking me why I wouldn't?
Yeah. What stops you from doing that? Because that's interesting.
What stops me? Well, that's a question. I have been on this path since I was born, and my parents, I was I literally one of these people that was born into church. Okay. Literally, my mom was from the second I was born, I was in a church, and I didn't really know much different until I was in high school. And so there is a level of conditioning of behavior and, what God expects from you. And I was taught to love God. Okay. So then as I progressed and I was older, I got away from the church because I started seeing that the church wasn't God, and there was a lot of mistakes and a lot of immoral acts and a lot of judgment and a lot of just cruelty and a lot of things that were happening that pulled me away from it. And I started seeking out God. As I developed a real relationship with God, not just something that I was told to do, then it turned into a mission of just service. And, and if we really want to get into it, there was a lot of, I would call contracts that I made with God, it's get me out of the situation and I promise that, whatever you ask me to do, I'll do. And there's, I think a lot of us have done that. What happened with me was I was born gifted. And so I had a lot of gifts, and those gifts I wasn't able to manage them very well. I didn't have any kind of coaching or teaching. And so when I tried to go to people that I thought were godly people to help me manage some of this, I didn't know what to do with it. Basically, like, chastised me. And so I had to hide that, and it became hard to hide it, and it became complicated because it was part of who I was. And at some point I got very frustrated and asked God to take it away.
Wow.
And in the process of that being taken away, suddenly I was blind, going through what I call the dark night of the soul. I literally had no GPS. Like, I didn't have intuition. I didn't have, I couldn't read people. I didn't know if people had bad intentions. It's like there was nothing. It was just like the blind leading the blind, like leading the blind. Like, it was literally like I was walking around. And I started falling apart. I was making bad choices because I couldn't figure out which way to go. Things were working out for me. And I realized that I needed these gifts and to manage my life. And so I prayed for them back. I heard God say, will you submit? I mean, I literally heard him say that. He said, will you submit? And at the time, because I'd gotten kind of wild, I was drinking and smoking and having a lot of sex. and so I was like, I thought that meant that I had to be a nun, stop drinking, stop smoking, stop partying, stop everything. I thought that I had to live this pure, go live in a convent life. I thought that's what he was asking me when he said submit. I'm not ready to stop all this, and that's all, and every time a trial would come, I would hear him say, are you ready to submit? And finally I said, yes. He said, okay, do this for me. And so I was like, okay. And I got my gifts back, and it was just something simple, like, go give this message to this person, or go help this person through this trial, or, and it was like little things, like little missions that I was given. They got a little bigger. They got a little bigger. And I would literally started hearing like a bell go off. Here's your next mission. It's time to leave. You're going to go somewhere else. And then when it was time to go, I would hear a bell, and I would hear a voice that would say, it's time to leave. And then something would happen that I would have to leave. Well, for me, it was just this thing that started happening. And I just kept on like becoming more of that divine servant over and over again, because the rewards that I got back, like, were always blessings that came to me. And I wasn't doing it. I guess that sounds kind of bad to say I was doing it for the wrong reasons. No, I don't really think so. I really started to connect with who I really was, with my true mission. And when I started making that connection, I started realizing that this is my Father, and this is my job. And my job is to be a servant of the divine.
You see, this is so interesting. This is what I was thinking probably happened, was that you reconnected with the divine, and you had that greater understanding, and therefore there's no need to sin anymore, right? It's sort of like that's the secret, in a sense. It's not about not doing it because you feel guilty. It's about having a realization about a different way. And if you do that, once you do that, there's no real going back, is there? There's no sort of like.
And my relationship has just gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. And as I've done my own personal alchemy, it just gets easier. It's like that part's been wiped out. Like, that pain has been resolved. That now I don't have to act out of pain. I don't have to respond out of pain. I can respond out of compassion. This person that did this is feeling this way, or even accuse me of something because of their own issues. And that is a space that I sit in and go, okay, I'm compassionate for what you're going through. And sometimes it doesn't get translated into words, but it is a feeling that I sit in. And that's all that really matters is how I feel about the situation and how I'm responding to this person, like not responding in pain.
You're kind of modeling for them, the access of the divine, and, the right way, sort of right in many ways. I don't know how to find right, but the way that's helpful.
I think one of the biggest turning points for me, I'll tell you this and then we can wrap it up, I guess. The biggest turning point for me was when I started getting into so many different things. Like I started discovering things, really igniting when God gave me back my gifts. Okay. This started opening up doors to things that I was questioning whether or not I was going down the wrong path. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So there was a lot of questioning about that because of my upbringing, because of the way that I was taught, as a fundamentalist. I started worrying about that. I started wondering, what if I'm making the wrong choices? What if I'm going to end up going to hell? What if there really is a hell? There was this little rabbit hole I started to follow when I started questioning this. Like I started praying about it and I started asking. And when you pray about something, somehow or another God gives you something that this little rabbit hole you start following. I don't know if this happens to you, but it does for me. It's like one thing leads to another, to another, to another, and it brings you full circle. Somehow or another, I got on this mission of trying to figure out why that the name of God was only said in the Bible like a couple of times. Mm-hmm. And why are they saying Lord? Why are they not saying God's name? Mm-hmm. And so I started researching that, and I ran into a Jewish website that was talking about the reasons why that the people, they were so afraid of people using God's name, because if you use it and you say it properly and you vibrate it, then you actually can invoke it. And they didn't want people to just go around invoking God without having intention behind it, and pure intentions, right? So they just replaced it with Lord.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, the name. Well, at the time I didn't know I hadn't studied Hebrew, right? So I didn't know how to pronounce it. So I said it the, American way. I said Yahweh. I said, well, if that's how you invoke God, I'm going to invoke God and I'm going to ask him. I need to know if I am on the wrong path. And so I started praying and I said, this is what I want to know. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I sat there and I laid in bed and I sat there laid there just chanting it over and over and over and over again, over and over and over again. I mean, this went on for like hours. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I had an instantaneous outer body experience. Mm-hmm. Like I was just yanked out, and I found myself running. There was another part of me. It's almost like a part of me that was split. The masculine part was following me, saying, it's over here. It's over here. Stop running. Just stay with me. And brought me over to this like warehouse. And he said, in here. And he kind of pushed me and he threw me in. And when he threw me in, I landed in this chair. And there was a being on the right and a being on the left. And when I landed in this chair, my hands went down onto the arms of the chair. Like it was 3 chairs connected. And I landed onto the arm in the center. And I had one hand on one arm of the chair and another on the other arm. And the 2 beings placed their hands on my hands. And immediately I connected to source. Okay. I'm telling you, I felt everything. I felt the vibration of the whole world and every being at the same time. It was the most intense feeling I ever felt in my entire life. It was like I could feel the plants, the animals, the earth, everything. It was just like every single person all at one time. And then all of a sudden this being comes down and it just like, and when he came down, it was like thunder. It was like, oh, and his voice sounded like thunder, right? He was like, I am Yahweh, like really loud, and I came out of the chair and I fell down on my knees. You know how like the Muslims pray, they get down on their knees and their hands go forward? That's exactly what I did. I came out of the chair, I plunged down onto the ground, hands down on the floor, head down, and said, Father. And then he said, sorry, this is emotional for me.
No, it's all right.
I have never been able to tell the story without crying. It's so weird. So then he said to me, be still, my child. I have nothing against you. And then he left. It was pretty intense. When I popped back on my body, I laid in the bed and sat there and cried. And cried and cried and cried and cried myself to sleep because I couldn't get past that feeling, because when I fell down to the ground, you know how I told you I felt that vibration?
Yeah.
When I fell down to the ground, the vibration that I felt was 1,000 times bigger. I went from feeling the vibration of the whole earth that was so intense to feeling the vibration of the universe. Like when in his presence, that's what I felt. And so for me, that was a huge turning point for me. I just said, that's it. I'm on this path. This is it. Now I know God is real. Like, it's like you want God to be real. You hear voices and you say to yourself, am I schizophrenic? Like, have I made this up? Am I imagining this? You can sit here and make up all these things inside of yourself and say, is it real? And my sister and I were just talking about this yesterday. She said, all these things that I've gone through, I'm questioning whether or not it was real. And I said, I understand that. I've been there. And when you have an experience so strong like this, to where, you actually are in the presence of the divine and he shows up, because you sat there and you're like, I'm invoking you, dude, and it was so like, who has the patience to do something like that? Like me, I was like, I'm not stopping till you come.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. And, and he showed up, it was like, whoa, so to answer your question, at that point, when something's so real and and the question is like, why did I say Father? Like I was out of my body. I was in my pure source space, and I fell to the ground and said Father. So there was some kind of connection that I made from my soul, from my higher self or something. So at that point, I was like, that's it. I commit the rest of my life to you, And I've been given a lot of what I call leeway, a lot of space. It's like, enjoy your life. This isn't, you don't have to be a nun. You don't have to go have fun. You want to go out, have some fun. Just be responsible about your actions. Don't get obliviously drunk to where you're getting in a car and you kill somebody. Be responsible about your actions. I've just taken it upon myself to just make sure that I live my life full, fun, enjoying it, trying to be in the world, but not of the world. So I hope that answers your question. I know it was a long answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key for everyone, isn't it? And I think that's what Jesus was trying to teach, was that once you have that connection with the divine, you are saved. You won't even think about sinning or whatever you want to call it. I don't even know what the Hebrew definition of sin was in those days. I mean, it might not be what we call it now. But yeah, you're just not going to go down that path.
I absolutely will not. There's just no way. It's just impossible for me now. Years ago, it might have been because I was in so much pain. And so much sorrow and had a lot of trauma. And so I was very reactive. Not anymore. Yeah. And and if you want to say, Jesus saved me or God saved me or Yahweh saved me, you can say whatever you want to say. But all I know is that I was given an opportunity to make something of my life that had meaning. And I chose that instead of choosing suffering.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it took quite a lot for you to get to that point. But once you got there, that was it. Which tells me that's the ingredients for all of us. It's like you've got to have some sort of realization. You've got to find some direction and connection with the divine. But before you do that, you probably have to sacrifice a lot of the old behaviors and habits and things that you used to do, which are your cross that you're burdened with. And then you'll be free.
So what about you? Like, why did you choose this path? Because I know you chose the divine path as well. So how did that happen for you?
I'll try to be quick, but I had a realization that where God came to me. That was it. And I think he was trying to knock on the door and so on for many years, but I was ignoring it. I was saying, I don't want to do that. I'm enjoying my life. I'm doing my But it came to a point where I was just praying, kneeling. I tried lots of paths, and I'd become Catholic at one point, and then I got into a prayer life. And at one point, I was praying and kneeling and just asking. I was trying to ask God, what's life about, or something.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it was at Pentecost. I just felt this enormous fire descend on me. It was incredible, like this divine light descended And it's very hard to put into words. It just did something. And it's a bit like your experience, it's like that presence was there. And I had tears and I was just constant, the emotions came up. It was like something was being processed and released. And even now when I think about it, I feel fire around my whole aura. It's like, I don't know, hard to put into words. And it was like he descended. It just descended into my being. And now I know I have that connection to God, and that's it. It's I can't question it anymore. It's like I can try and do things. I can run. I can try and get drunk, but it just doesn't happen. It just, it's like I don't need to.
That is so funny. You know what's so funny about this is that the exact same thing with me. I will literally like go, you know what? I've got all this wine collection and I never drink it. It's literally got dust on the wine. Okay. And I keep on thinking I'm going to cancel it and I keep on forgetting. And then I go in, cause I pay like $50 a month for it. And then I go in after like several months saying, I just got to cancel this. Right. So I go in and I see there's like a $200 credit and I'm thinking, okay, you know what? I'm just going to order a whole bunch of wine and I'll give it away as a gift. And I'm getting cases of wine, so I've got this huge collection and this keeps on happening. And every so often my husband will say, you should drink some of this wine. I'll have a glass or two and, like 2 glasses of wine used to get me like super tipsy. Mm-hmm. Even a bottle of wine would get me like way over the top. And I would sit there and I drink it and I drink a whole bottle and felt nothing. Like, I don't even know how that happens. I can still literally, I do this wine and tarot with Marco and I'll drink it and I might get a little giddy, but there is like no drunkenness at all. And I'm like sitting here going, well, I'm drinking empty calories. I probably shouldn't do that. I just can't get drunk anymore. I have, Shane and I would have like a celebration for like our anniversary or something, and we're like, okay, let's just get some like Jack Daniels or something a little stronger, get a little tipsy and have some fun, turn on some music, dance around, have some fun. I still wouldn't get drunk. Yeah. It is the weirdest thing. It's like, why bother?
Yeah, right. It just does something, doesn't it?
It's a very strange thing, but going back to your thing real quick, and I know we need to close this off, but when you said the thing about the divine light descending on you, I totally get that because that's happened to me before, where you start to feel it and see this light like coming over you, and you just start crying.
It was fire. I mean, it was like well, and but the emotions and the tears just, and it was like, I don't know what this is, but I just, literally, as you did, you have to go prostrate on the floor, like flat on the floor with your hands out for the divine. I couldn't stop myself doing that. It was like, what am I doing? But part of me was, my ego was saying, what's happening? But
why are you doing this? Like, why did I just fall to the ground? Why did I say Father? Your mind starts like asking questions, but it's like there's something inside of you that just knows, right? You just experienced this. You just had a remembering, And it's like, that's it right there. It's like you have this remembering. It's like we have this veil over us. We come into this world and we forget. If I was to sum it all up, it all came down to remembering.
Until we'd been through those negative experiences and that cross, we'd carried that burden. And until we'd faced that, this thing couldn't probably happen.
Right. That's exactly right. It's not until you face it and till your problems become so heavy that burden becomes so strong that you finally like submit. And that was with me. It was like, he was like, submit. Allow me to be in your life. Open up your heart and remember. And for me, it's all about remembering who I am and remembering my connection and remembering my divinity.
Absolutely.
And that's the bottom line. Yeah. Oh, this is
a beautiful note to end it on.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Well, so thank you so much. This has really been a great conversation. And
thank you again.
And you guys, we're going to close this off with remember.
Hi, this is Michelle, and I want to personally thank you for joining us in this series, The Walk of Christ. This tallies up the end of this series, and we will be now moving on to the next series where we are going to be talking about the path of Buddha. the path to enlightenment. I hope that you join us in this new series. See you there.